Well, I'm Harold Cazneaux's grandson, and I was lucky enough to live opposite the Cazneaux house, Ambleside, where the photographic studio existed, until the age of 8 when my grandfather died. And he was my mother's father, was on my mother's side, and I knew him very well. He used to take me to the beach. I called him Grandpa. And also it was the reason I got into radio and electronics, because in the old home at Ambleside in Roseville, which was opposite where I lived, I used to be given the key to Harold's room, and I was able to see the old radio. Now, Harold was Harold Cazneaux's son, my grandfather's son, my uncle who got killed in the Second World War. They'd locked up the room, and in the 1950s, 10 years or so later, I was allowed to go in and see all the old radio equipment, and that motivated me into electronics. I grew up with my grandfather's work, and it's always been in our house and in my mother's house and in my grandparents' houses. And I love Australia. Maybe it gave me my love for Australia. My grandfather, he was born in New Zealand but spent most of his life, nearly all of his life, in Australia. He never travelled to England or Europe or anywhere like that. He just loved Australia. He did one trip to the Flinders Ranges and took the famous photograph of the Spirit of Endurance, beautiful river red gum. And that's become my favourite Cazneaux photograph. And I've travelled many times to the Flinders Ranges to see the tree, which is still there. What I most admire about my grandfather is the fact that he's lasted as a famous artist. I mean, I can't believe that as a kid, people used to say to me, "Oh, you're Harold Cazneaux's grandson," and I didn't realise the significance then. And it's interesting that this is sort of 50 years or so later, and he's becoming more famous. But he was a very unassuming person. He loved his family. He used to take us to the beach at DY. I remember him taking photographs of myself. He was a very gentle person and, of course, an absolute artist. I love the photographs he took at Frensham, the girls' school, but also the BHP photographs. But probably my favourite, I'm a technical person. I like mechanical things as well as the out of doors. And he did a beautiful book called The Bridge Book. And if ever you compare a Harold Cazneaux photograph of the Sydney Harbour Bridge with any other photograph, it's quite clear which is the Harold Cazneaux photograph. They are works of art. Every photograph is a work of art. I'm very impressed to be here at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. This is the best Cazneaux exhibition I've ever seen. Obviously, a lot of hard work's gone into it, which is incredibly important. The curator has gone around and managed to collect the Cazneaux works from the National Library, but more importantly from family members and other people who have got photographs that have never been shown. And people must remember, even though various galleries own many of the negatives, the glass negatives, you can't just print a Cazneaux negative and get a Cazneaux photograph. It needed Cazneaux who would do the work on it. I used to stand beside my grandfather at the studio in Roseville or in the dark room and see him work on a photograph. He might bring clouds in, he might change the contrast ratio. Now, no one can do that again, so these prints are just magnificent. His photographs come from areas that he loved, the South Australia, the Flinders Ranges, also DY Beach. Most people would not realise, but most of the photographs which show the beach side or the razzle-dazzle, they all come from DY Beach, because that was my grandfather's favourite place to take us. We would all go down in the silver anniversary Buick that he owned, travel down to DY Beach. In those days, he wasn't photographing. This was in the early 50s. And to look at those photographs now and see the headland of Long Reef in the background, it takes me back to those wonderful days we had on the weekends with my grandfather and my grandmother.